Everybody knows the name Bugatti, the most famous hypercars in the world. If we want to explain the history of this company, we have to use two words: sadness and success. If we want to know the history of this company, we have to go back about 100 years in Italy. On the 15th of September 1881, in the city of Milan, a little boy was born named Ettore Bugatti. His father, meaning Carlo Bugatti, was a very successful businessman that sold furniture and also designed jewelry. The entire family was very creative. His father was already a successful furniture designer. Ettore was a brilliant artist. His brother Rembrandt was a professional sculptor. But alongside all the creative things and artistry, Ettore loved one more thing, and that's mechanics. Things that work mechanically. Things like bicycles, trains, watches, and cars. Ettore had a bicycle at a very young age, and he always loved modifying it and working on it. And you could say his father Carlo Bugatti would see this, and he was impressed with what he knew. And because of that, he took him to a factory nearby, a factory that was ran by Prinetti and Stucci. When he asked them to hire his kid, they say, "We don't hire children." But Carlo told them, "I don't want you to hire my son as an employee. I want to hire him so you can teach him about mechanics." And when he offered them money, the owner of the shop agreed and hired the little boy. Ettore works in this shop for a couple of years, and when he gets to the age of 17, he has already designed his own tricycle from the ground up. And after a while, he realizes that he can add an engine to it. So he basically invented a motorcycle from the ground up by himself. You could say the reason for the success of Ettore Bugatti was his father Carlo taking him to this factory and making his passion even stronger for mechanical things. When you get to the year 1900, Ettore Bugatti is only 19 years of age, but at this young age, he has decided to completely design his own car and eventually build it. In the beginning, we said he was a very brilliant artist. So when you put the mechanical knowledge and the artistry together, you get someone that's very good at designing cars. He would design cars at a young age that other engineers and designers wouldn't believe. A lot of people would talk smack about it, that it's not possible to build these, but most people would appreciate it and call Ettore designs beautiful. All the designs of these cars made Ettore Bugatti kind of famous in the car designing world. So a German company decided to hire him, a company called D. Dietrich. They immediately contact him and asked him to come join us and design cars for us. When you get to the year 1903, Ettore Bugatti is only 22 years old, and at this age, he had already designed his car and completely built it from the ground up. He had designed this car for a race between Paris and Madrid, but when the judges saw this car, they told him that he cannot race this thing because no cars in this race stands a chance. You could say it was more advanced than any car at that time. Ettore Bugatti was the first car designer that said the engine of the car should sit lower on the chassis and further back for balance. After a few years, he quits his job at D. Dietrich and gets a job at Deutz to design engines for them. Even though Bugatti is working for different companies, he's not really interested in staying here long term. He's just trying to gain information and experience to start his own company and design his own cars. He wanted cars that were lightweight, powerful, and beautiful, and all his designs had this in mind. Just like he was thinking this, he was designing his own car and building it in his own garage. And eventually, in the year 1908, he had designed the first ever Bugatti with his own name on it, the Bugatti Type 10. The Type 10 had a 1.2-liter four-cylinder, but the thing that made it special was that the car only weighed 365 kilograms. This low weight and a powerful engine compared to its weight made this car go about 80 kilometers an hour. And this made it one of the fastest cars in the 1900s. And this is when he finally opens his own business, Automobili Ettore Bugatti. Whenever there was any type of race around Europe, Ettore Bugatti would take his Type 10 there to just show it off and tell the other races that this is a race car, not what you're driving. And after this, it causes the race community around the world to know the name Bugatti very well. This is around the same time that Bugatti's first son is being born, Jean Bugatti. Since Ettore was becoming very successful in the racing world, he took the Type 10 and made it better in every way, and that slowly turned the car into the Type 13. He also designed a new engine with 4 valves per cylinder, an engine that created 30 horsepower, and the car only weighed 300 kilograms, so it was one of the fastest cars at that time. And this made the Bugatti name even bigger, and not only car enthusiasts knew about it, but most people knew about it. And that's all because most newspapers would write about him. And after everybody was talking about them, Bugatti became one of the most well-known car brands in the racing world. But all of a sudden, everything took a turn, and it was a bad one, because World War I began. When this war began, it closed all the factories that had something related to what Bugatti was doing, and nobody cared about race cars for a while. Even though his factory was closed, but Ettore's mind was not. He continued designing and made his Type 13 better and better on paper. When World War I ends, Ettore tries to apply all the modifications to the car he had designed, and the Type 13 that was upgraded was very successful. And all the rich and wealthy people that were interested in racing, they wanted a Bugatti Type 13. After his company started to thrive once again, he designed a new car, the Bugatti Type 35. You could say the Type 35 is one of the most successful race cars in the world. You might say modern race cars will smoke this thing, but you have to know that in its era, nothing else could keep up with this thing, and that is why it won trophy after trophy, making it one of the most successful race cars in the world. And when you get to the 1930s, the most famous race car is the Type 35. It's around this time that Jean Bugatti, his son, tells his dad that we should take these race cars, make them a tiny more luxury, and sell it to wealthy people that are not interested in racing, but they want something amazing like your cars. Jean gave a great idea to Ettore, and they designed their very first luxurious car, the Type 41 Bugatti Royale. Saying the Type 41 was a success is an understatement, because every wealthy person at that time wanted to buy one, and that's the reason they had to put a limit on it. They would only sell it to kings and queens and British aristocrats. These customers were enough to sell out all the cars Bugatti is gonna make. When you get to the middle of the 1930s, the Great Depression has hit the world pretty hard, in a way where wealthy people aren't even interested in Bugatti's cars anymore. You have to know that Bugatti was starting in Germany, but they continued doing it in France. And that is why, to not make the Bugatti car brand go bankrupt, the French government helped them out and told them to design us trains and build them, and Bugatti agreed. It's at this time when Ettore realizes that his son Jean is exactly like him. He's fascinated by mechanical and beautiful works of art like his cars, and he's very passionate about the company. That is why when the Great Depression is finally over, he hands over the keys to the company to his son Jean Bugatti and tells him he can run everything now. You could say Jean Bugatti makes the company thrive even harder, and he designs even more luxurious and desirable cars. In simple terms, hypercars of the 1930s. At around that time, Jean Bugatti releases one of the greatest cars ever made, the Bugatti Type 57, which is also known as one of the most beautiful cars. After 90 years, this design is unbeatable. Just imagine seeing this in 1937. Jean Bugatti was a son that every father dreamed of, and he was following every goal Ettore Bugatti had. Just like his father, not only was he an engineer, but he was fascinated by engineering and mechanical things. So any car that was finished designing, he would take it for a test drive and actually drive it in the track himself. On the 11th of August 1939, while he's test driving one of the Bugatti Type 57 that the factory had made, all of a sudden, an intruder bicycle enters the track. A bicycle that was not supposed to be there. Since he was in the middle of the track, Jean had to swerve out of the way, but when he swerved, he turned into a tree and smashed right into it, killing him on the spot. After this has taken place, Ettore is more than depressed. He loved his son, a son that he couldn't imagine losing, and that is why he took the biggest hit. 3 months after this tragedy, Ettore Bugatti was confronted with another one. The Germans enter France. They take over his factory and arrest him. They tell him, if you want to be released, you have to design torpedoes for us, which he heavily declined, and they put him in prison. After a while, the Germans realize that they can't just leave him in prison, so they finally release him, and he can stay under German control in Paris. In 1945, the war is over and the Germans are defeated, and this is when France is in French control once again. This was Bugatti's time to finally get his factory back. But when the new government confronts him and asks him questions, they get skeptical and ask him, why did the Germans release you from prison and why are you an Italian citizen? He says that he was born in Italy, but he was working in France. And long story short, they blame him that he's a spy for the Germans and they don't return his belongings or his factory. You could say this was the last stab to Ettore Bugatti's heart, and you can't get any more sad and depressed than this. After a year, they return his letter and tell him there has been a mistake and you can have your factory back. But it was too late, because 10 days after receiving this letter, Ettore Bugatti died. Ettore Bugatti's family got back the factory, but they didn't have the passion that he and his son Jean had, so the company was a complete dead end. This bankrupt company remains until we get to the year 1987, when there's a new buyer in town wanting to purchase this company, an Italian entrepreneur named Romano Artioli. He purchased the company and raises the Bugatti name from the ashes. He starts off the company with this car, the Bugatti EB110. The company was in good hands, someone that had the passion Ettore and Jean once had. But unfortunately, it was a dead end as well. He couldn't get many sales, and the company was facing bankruptcy. After facing bankruptcy, it seems like the company of Volkswagen was waiting for this day. And when it finally hit, they asked him to sell the company. Since Artiole owed a lot of money and he was facing bankruptcy, he was willing to sell. And they agreed on a price of $50 million. And Bugatti was in Volkswagen's hands now, a company that cannot be bankrupt anymore. After this, Bugatti's company continued growing faster than it ever did. It is true that Ettore and Jean Bugatti are no longer around, and the company is not their family's, but their name still remain on these cars, and their name will go down in history as one of the first hypercars in the world. It's Christmas Day 1878, and a young boy is born in Switzerland, which they name Louis Chevrolet. Louis had 6 brothers and sisters, and his father was a man named Joseph Chevrolet. Just like many Swiss men back then, Joseph was also a watchmaker, and he would work very hard so his family could eat. Unfortunately, life was extremely hard for Joseph's family, and the only kid that would understand his father's struggle and try to help him was Louis Chevrolet. He would hang by him just to learn how watchmaking works so he can help out. Joseph had a hard life. He had 7 children, and him and his wife made 9 people. And feeding that many people is extremely difficult. Since Louis was the only one that understood the struggle, he decided to quit school at 11 years old to get a job and help out his family. Louis Chevrolet gets a job at a bike shop, and he very quickly picks it up on how these bicycles work, in a way where he could find junk all around the shop and build his own bicycle. With the help of these junk parts, he had created a bike that was much faster than any other bike in his town. So he would always challenge the kids at his old school to come and race and make some money. But of course, he knew he was going to win because he was the fastest, and he would hustle these little kids. It would get to a point where every day after school, the kids with their bicycle would line up in an uncrowded area so they can race bicycles and bet on who's faster. And you know damn well Louis Chevrolet was always in first place. It got to a point where Louis Chevrolet winning races was generating more money than his parents. And that's when he slowly got well known around the city. At this time, there was an American staying near Louis that had a steam tricycle that was having some trouble. And he was looking for a type of mechanic that knew how these tricycles work so he can fix it. That's when one of the kids asked Louis if he can fix these bicycles. Louis says, absolutely, I can fix anything. Let's see what the problem is. The steam tricycle that Louis saw made him go crazy because he had never seen such a machine. He had never seen a tricycle that would move under its own power and it didn't need pedals. These were the very first cars basically. Steam tricycles or steam bicycles. The owner of the tricycle was someone important, William Kissam Vanderbilt, one of the sons of Cornelius Vanderbilt. One of the men that basically built America in terms of railroad, and you could compare his wealth to Rockefeller. When Vanderbilt sees Louis as a little kid that has so much knowledge about these bicycles and tricycles, he tells him, why are you wasting your life here? You should be in America, where people like you will be very successful. But Louis was still a kid and he couldn't make that decision just yet, but he would dream about going to America. The story continues and we get to the year 1899 when Louis is 21 years old. Since Louis was a fanatic in mechanical things, he would read everything about steam engines and bicycles and tricycles, and he wanted to collect the maximum information about these things. Since he wanted to go to a huge city to continue his career, he decided to move to Paris. When the mechanics over there realized that this little kid knows what he's talking about and what he's doing, they quickly hire him as a mechanic. This is the first time he gets familiar with the gasoline engine. When he sees a gasoline engine, his idea of engine completely changes, and he believed that gasoline engine is millions of times better than a steam engine. It didn't take very long for him to save some money to move to the US. He wasn't even in Paris for a year, and he got into a boat ride and went to New York City. When Louis finally gets to the United States, unfortunately he loses his father in Switzerland, and this is when he decides to tell his entire family to try to move to the United States because life is much better and easier here. Louis continues to get a job all around the US being a mechanic, and he finally lands a job in Fiat. When Fiat realizes that Louis Chevrolet is very knowledgeable, they send him to the Fiat race team to continue designing race cars. He becomes very successful in that area. Not only was he a master mechanic, but he was a fantastic driver. He shows himself in the many races he raced, and he broke record after record. In a way, you could consider Louis Chevrolet the greatest driver in the 1900s. You can't compare driving back then to driving today, because it's much easier now. Back then, the drivers would basically wrestle with the car. Nothing had help. Everything was mechanical. Even the brakes, it was the power of your foot that stopped it. So you had to have insane strength to control a car like this. Chevrolet continues to break records until he meets a man named John Walter Christie, and he requests Chevrolet to move to Philadelphia to build race cars for him. Since the income was much higher than the Fiat job, Louis Chevrolet accepted and moved to Philadelphia. It doesn't take very long before he starts designing different cars, and it's good to know that Louis Chevrolet designed the very first front-wheel drive car right here. While he was designing different types of cars, he was also a race car driver, and he would race everywhere in the US. At this time, there was zero safety in these cars, and there was a high chance that when a race car driver participates and they get in a car crash, they would die. That's how dangerous it was. If you've seen our video about Bugatti, Ettore Bugatti lost his son Jean Bugatti just like this. But this is a few decades after Louis Chevrolet. Louis Chevrolet got in many accidents, but he didn't die because that's how tough he was. But unfortunately, when he turned 30, he had body pain everywhere, and he had to keep going to the doctor for neck pain, back pain, and leg pain. While Louis Chevrolet continues to go to the doctors and building race cars, he meets a man named William C. Durant. He is one of the founders of General Motors. William suggests to Louis to become one of the race car drivers for their Buick racing team. Since the pay was better, Louis Chevrolet accepted. Not only did William love the way Louis drove the car, he also loved his name, and he thought it was a beautiful name for a car. That's when he suggested to Louis that we should start a car company and put your last name on the company, Chevrolet Motor Company. Louis accepted and said, "My brother has to be under the company, Arthur Chevrolet." In the year 1911, Chevrolet Motor Company started. They separated the workload like this. Louis and Arthur would work on the engineering and design of the cars, and William Durant was the investor and the marketing manager. 1 year later, the first Chevrolet is built, the Chevy Classic 6, which later on the name was changed to Chevrolet Type C. This was pretty revolutionary because it was a very lightweight car, but it had a 4.8 liter 6-cylinder under the hood. and it was extremely powerful for 1911. This power allowed the car to reach 110 kilometers an hour. When this car reached sales, they put an extremely high price on it, $2250, which is about $65,000 in today's money. But the Type C wasn't a normal vehicle. This vehicle was considered a luxurious vehicle, and the reason for that was that it had high quality material and a powerful engine. But since Chevrolet was a very new company and they weren't well known and it was an expensive car, they only sold 500 of them. William Durant was not a fan of this type of vehicle that doesn't have a lot of buyers, and he told Louis to create a cheaper car, a car that everybody could buy. Louis denied that offer and told him if they want to buy a cheap car, go buy a Henry Ford Model T. And at that time, a Model T cost around $800. But William kept telling Louis, with this type of car building, we're not going to make any money. Louis would give a negative answer and say, we will only build luxurious and cool cars, not normal cars. After this fat argument they had with one another, he decides to tell William Durant that he wants to go to Switzerland to visit his family back then, and he needs about a couple months off. He goes to Switzerland, visits his family, and comes back to the United States. But he comes back to a company that's unlike anything he left a couple months back. William Durant has changed everything about Chevrolet Motor Company, and this was all without speaking or the permission of Chevrolet. Once again, they had an argument with one another. After all the argument, Louis Chevrolet tells William Durant, I sold you my name and design, but I'll never sell my personality. That's why he quits working for Chevrolet. He gets back to the only thing he loves, designing race cars. We get to the year 1915, and Louis Chevrolet probably makes one of the biggest mistakes in his life. He decides to sell his share in the Chevrolet Motor Company for dirt cheap. And this is at a time that Chevrolet is not worth a lot. William Durant was the owner of General Motors, and he wasn't worried about Chevrolet Motor Company as much as the other manufacturing companies. So Chevrolet was just standing still, not being worked on. But either way, he sold his name and company to William Durant. And when William Durant owned most of the company now, he decided to execute what he wanted to do all along: cheap, affordable cars. But what did Louis do? With the little amount of money he got from Durant, he started his own company named the Frontenac Motor Company, which he designs and builds race engines. At this time, you could say Louis Chevrolet was building one of the greatest race cars in the world. But when you get to the year 1922, Gaston Chevrolet, Louis' little brother, gets into a race car accident and dies. The only person that was feeling extremely guilty was Louis Chevrolet. He hated himself that he let his little brother get behind that wheel, and he felt like it was his fault that his little brother died. That's when he promised himself that he will never build race cars ever again, and he exclusively built engine for different manufacturers. But when you go forward, we're reaching the 1930s. The Great Depression is about to hit, and a lot of companies will go out of business. And one of those companies was Louis engine building business. But the thing is, William Durant had been running Chevrolet very well, because when you get to the 1930s, for the very first time, Chevrolet Motor Company is outselling Ford Motor Company, the #1 company in the world at that time. So you could say Chevy Motor Company was a huge success. But Louis Chevrolet himself, that had his name on the company, is bankrupt. After the Great Depression, Louis Chevrolet's age has been hitting him hard, and he doesn't have the motivation to start another company. That's why he went to Detroit to his own company that started it and asked for a job. The people in charge didn't even realize that this is the man that started it all, and his name is on the company. So they gave him a normal job in the assembly line. He couldn't work for a few months because he was suffering with a sickness that had been bothering him for many years. And when he went to the doctor, they said they had to amputate his leg to make him survive, because if they don't, he will die. After the amputation, Louis cannot work anymore. and he has no type of income from anything. He only lasts for 3 more years, and in the year 1941, at the age of 63, he passes away. His brother Arthur gets extremely depressed on what he is confronted with, and 2 years later, he commits suicide. On the other side, Chevrolet is becoming a worldwide brand, and every country is buying it. In the year 1953, the iconic Chevrolet Corvette is released, the first American sports car. Chevrolet Impala, the most sold car in the world and the most sold car in 1 year in the US. Chevrolet Impala is the only car that sold more than 1 million in 1 year. This was the story of Louis Chevrolet, the founder of probably one of the most famous companies in the entire world. A life that started off well, continued to be well, but ended tragically.